Well, that was certainly disappointing on Saturday, but not the end of the line for Oklahoma. Still in the driver's seat to get to a Big 12 championship game. And, well, it depends on the committee in regards to a college football playoff berth. We got Jason Ray on the line, as we always do, talking Oklahoma football with you each and every Wednesday, 12:30 Eastern, 11:30 in Norman, Oklahoma. Jason, how you doing?
Doing great, Mark. Thanks for having me. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. I am doing well. And we have all sorts of news, not necessarily news, talk surrounding Lincoln Riley that we'll get to in a few minutes. And we invite everyone to leave your comments and your questions, debate topics there in the chat. So, this game against Baylor, so the offense really had its issues. 14 points on the board, 2 touchdowns. That's it. Caleb Williams made more than a few errant throws, bad decisions, poor decisions, was taken out of the game. Spencer Rattler comes in, wasn't able to bring him back. Did Lincoln Riley, I did not see his news conference this week, did he address the quarterback situation and if there's going to be any possibility of change?
No, he really didn't talk much about it. And then Caleb Williams actually came back in the game late and actually orchestrated that. I mean, really just kind of garbage time touchdown. It was, not really, the game was. I guess there was a path, but the path wasn't very strong for them. So I would certainly expect Caleb Williams to still be the starter. I know that Spencer Rattler had the flu on Saturday, and he still put him in. So maybe that's a little bit of indicative of how much Caleb Williams was struggling. But I think, Mark, one of the things that we've talked about Oklahoma's offense, particularly Lincoln Riley's attack, is very much predicated on being able to run the football, and they were largely ineffective in being able to run the football. At times, they didn't even really try to run the football as much as you would have liked and you would have expected. So, I mean, I think that's part of it. I think, we've talked a little bit about, he's still a true freshman at the end of the day, and this was obviously his biggest test and his first real road test, right? He played in the Red River game, which is neutral. Then he played at Kansas, which isn't necessarily a huge road environment. But then, going to Baylor was the best team, obviously, that Oklahoma has played, and like I said, or the best defense definitely that Oklahoma has played thus far this year. And so, I don't know. I think there's a lot of concern in terms of of how elaborate Oklahoma's run scheme is, just from an offensive line perspective. So I think that's something that's continuing to be concerning. I think this is something that's been talked about here locally from a media perspective over the last couple of years. Is just the sophistication and the blocking scheme that Oklahoma puts in place, and I think they've gotten away with it with just an enormous amount of talent over the last few years. The talent from a recruiting perspective hasn't been the same, over the last couple of years. So I think that's part of it. But I think that's something that Oklahoma internally, Gabe Eichert and Teddy Lehman talk about this on a lot of occasions, just talking about how specifically Gabe Eichert talking about the sophistication that Oklahoma has on the front end, and it's becoming problematic just in terms of it's not anything basic stretch plays, running plays. It's something that Oklahoma just doesn't run, and almost every team across the country runs, and even some of the blocking schemes that Oklahoma has in place is not something that is even done at the next level. So obviously that's not something to worry about right now, but I think that's something that will be interesting to kind of think through in the offseason going into next year. But Oklahoma has to be able to run the ball at least to a varying degree to be able to be successful at all. And I think it was the second game in a row where Oklahoma has been under 100 yards rushing. I think Caleb Williams had like 17, 18 yards on 11 carries. Kennedy Brooks had like 50 something yards on 14 carries. And, I think, they just didn't attempt to run the football as much as they probably should have.
Seems like an interesting debate or conversation when you bring up what the criticisms are about the blocking schemes, the complexity, and the run plays that are not being used by Oklahoma that are used by just about everybody else across college football, because that would seem on the surface to be a concern. Okay, maybe the blocking schemes are too complex for these players to learn. Why not utilize the talent more in a simplified fashion so they can be effective and not have to think so much? And then again, there are effective run plays that are at the base of most offenses across the country. Why not Oklahoma? On the flip side, when the running game was successful, it was obviously in the same fashion with the same approach, and those were not concerns then.
Yeah, and I think, Mark, the biggest concern, maybe of all of it, is that they're not getting the same quality offensive line recruiting that they have in the past. And it's been indicative of the just the talent that's on the field. So I don't know if any of that has to do, if there's any correlation between the two. But no, I think your point's well taken. It's just like everything else. Coaching is excellent when they're playing well, but then all of a sudden, and this is why I don't really get into, I think we're on the same page with this, is um I don't really get into that as much, because coaches don't forget how to coach from one year to the next, right? I think part of it has to do with the players and things like that. But I think just in general, Oklahoma has to figure out a way, whether it's schemes or whatever, just to be able to run the football as effective as they have in the past. Because the last couple of years, they kind of got it together towards the end of last year, right? But I think last year was probably um, the worst overall rushing team that Oklahoma has had since Riley has been here. And then this year's been worse. So whatever it is, whether it's blocking schemes, whether it's talent up front, whatever that looks like, because that's what makes this offense go. So I think that's something that's going to have to be key going into next year, but certainly in these last two games of the season.
Okay, let's address the elephant of sorts in the room that has gained a lot of steam in terms of online, and enough for Lincoln Riley to be asked about it. And certainly everyone within the Oklahoma camp needs to know, meaning the Oklahoma fan base that just focuses on the Sooners, understand guys like Jimbo Fisher are being asked the same question concerning the LSU job. So James Franklin's being asked about it. There are all sorts of top line coaches that are being asked about, the big jobs that are open. And we've got two mammoth vacancies in college football with USC and LSU, and some other ones. Even before we've gotten to the end of the season, Jason, and the typical Black Friday, I call it Black Friday, I guess it's Black Sunday after the last regular season game, and the flood of job openings with firings. We've already opened up USC, LSU, Texas Tech, TCU, Washington State, for other reasons, are
Right.
open. So we're going to have a wild December in filling job vacancies, because of course it creates a domino effect. So as soon as it's just not 7 or 8 jobs, it becomes 15 or 20 jobs.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And Lincoln's been linked to a couple of things before from the NFL. I think this is the first legitimate. I think legitimate. I don't know the right word to say, the way that he's being pulled, and things like that. So I think first and foremost, I think if a team like LSU comes calling it, something that he probably listens to. I don't know that he necessarily has, even if it's even if it's just leverage for a pay raise. I mean, at the very least, coaches have been known to do that a lot of times in the past. But I think it's something that he would probably have to listen to. For one, it's a really good job. I mean, I'm not necessarily. I don't know that I would. It's an interesting discussion. I don't know if I would characterize it as a better job than Oklahoma. It's definitely. I don't know that I would say that it's worse. A worse job. I think the one thing that you can think of from an LSU perspective is they can probably pay him more money than Oklahoma would be willing to pay him. Not that they're not willing to pay him, but I think they would. LSU would probably open up the checkbook to make him the highest paid coach in college football. Should that be something that he wanted to do? And I think that one of the things that Oklahoma had as far as that would be in the past that maybe Oklahoma has an easier path to win a national championship in the Big 12 versus the SEC. Well, they're on even playing ground now, for all intents and purposes, whenever that happens. So I don't know. I think one of the things that me and you talked about early on in the year, before the season even started with Oklahoma, was the expectations that they had coming into the season, which was almost playoff or play in a national championship game or bust. And barring a miracle at this point, I mean, there's a path, but they still need some things to happen. But Oklahoma probably won't even make the playoffs this year. So I think all of us talking about Oklahoma, previewing them, and just looking at them, thought it would be a pretty massive disappointment should Oklahoma not make the playoffs. And then I remember saying this: just does it get to a situation with Lincoln where he believes that he can't win a championship at Oklahoma? And so, at the end of the day, that's something that maybe he's thinking about in the back of his mind. I don't think he'll go. I mean, I don't, even if they open up the checkbook, but I wouldn't be surprised if he went. But I don't necessarily think that he would go. Now, I mean, it's enticing. Like if a school like LSU wants to make you the highest paid head coach in the country, I mean, it's hard to say no. I mean, I know you listen to, and you've had him on your show, listen to Josh Pate a lot, and he said really one of the things that he said, he believes that LSU maybe is a better job than Oklahoma. And just one of the things, Nick Saban's probably the only person that wouldn't listen if outside of that, most maybe not Dabo at Clemson, but and maybe Ryan Day at Ohio State, but you know a large contingent of coaches would listen, including Jimbo. So I don't know. I think it'll be interesting to see how that how that manifests itself through the end of the season. To your kind of to your point on the Black Sunday or whatever, just in terms of all the coaching vacancies that will come open. I certainly think Aranda would probably be he's definitely going to be a hot commodity, whether it's even looking at the LSU situation or wherever that might be.
It is an interesting comparison to make between LSU and Oklahoma as job status. Oklahoma under Lincoln Riley, and even before that with Bob Stoops, is more of a consistent winner. How much of that has to do with playing in a different conference, we don't know.
Yeah.
And LSU has been a little bit more uneven, certainly, in regards to being competitive. They now are working on 2 consecutive down seasons, and I mean down, not 8-4 down, 500 record down. But of course, they've peaked to win national championships 3 times in the last 18 seasons.
And I think that's, Mark, it's kind of funny that Barry Switzer had talked about for years and years about the monster that is the Oklahoma just football program, the expectations and things like that. And right now, Oklahoma, the monster is kind of, I think, at its peak. just in terms of Oklahoma has had the longest drought in program history without winning a national championship, with their last one being in 2000. So, 21, 22 years at this point without winning the national championship. So, I mean, like it or not, at a school like Oklahoma, that's the expectation. I mean, not every year, obviously, but going 20 years without a championship is really something that the fans won't don't really tolerate very well. So I think there's more agitation, I think, this year based on where Oklahoma's at. And I think, specifically with the expectations. And, I know a lot of Oklahoma fans probably don't like to hear this, and maybe people listening here don't like to hear this, but this team is probably, the way they've played on the field is probably a fringe top 25 team right now. They're top 15 because of their respect and because of the name, and they've won the games in front of them. When you look at the way that they've played on the field, you go all the way back to Tulane. Tulane is a respectable program year in and year out. Not necessarily this year. They've won one football game. Um, we've talked about the issues that Nebraska has had. Over this year, and not necessarily a bad football team, but just always continuously finding ways to lose. And and their best win is, you could argue, Kansas State versus Texas. And Texas, I mean, a complete dumpster fire right now. And um, so yeah, I mean, I think if Oklahoma, I think that the saving grace for Oklahoma fans is they, at least we're not in the same situation that Texas is in. But I think at the same time that monster is growing, and that they expect, especially in seasons like this where the expectations were a um, at the very least a national championship game appearance. And like I said, barring some chaos down the stretch, that's the playoffs probably isn't even going to happen. And I don't know. I mean, we'll get into the Iowa State and Oklahoma State, but the Iowa State's still a really good football team. Given, especially, I know that they've lost 4 games, but they're still a really good football team. And Oklahoma's only a 4-point favorite at home against an unranked team. So I mean, that kind of shows where um, the value that I think this Oklahoma football team has currently in its current state.
Yeah, you look at the schedules that some of the other top contenders have had to face and will be facing in future weeks, and you can play this game with any team in any situation any year. But you have to wonder, looking at Oklahoma's performance, and it finally came to roost this past Saturday against a quality team where, okay, they've been hanging by a thread.
Mm-hmm.
Are they going to meet? Are they going to make it through, or is it going to be too much for them? And it's obviously turned out to be, um, when they face the best team on their schedule thus far, they they weren't even that close. And
Yeah,
and,
no, that's what I was going to say. The game. I mean, I know that the 27-13 score, kind of allows the game to look like it was close, but after the 7-0 lead, Baylor pretty much dominated that game from that point forward. Had almost 300 yards rushing um, in the game, and yeah, like I said, you're right. The first ranked team, I think Texas might have been ranked when they played, but the first team that's still remaining that's ranked, Oklahoma, and just didn't play very well. Some of the things that and it's a lot of the same things that they've had in the past. Defensively, open field tackling has continued to be an issue. Getting pressure on the quarterback has continued to be an issue. I think there's concern to maybe Oklahoma's, the speed D kind of mentality that Alex Grinch had kind of brought to Oklahoma in terms of lighter, faster defensive linemen. They get pushed around a little bit in the trenches, and so that's continuing to be a concern. And Like I said, Oklahoma having probably the two most talented teams in the Big 12 remaining. Baylor's, one of the things that was very interesting, kind of over the last couple of years, Oklahoma has had a pretty wide gap from a talent perspective versus all the teams that they've played in the Big 12. Some of them weren't as wide, like an Oklahoma State or a Texas, but that you can tell that talent gap is closing in a little bit. You specifically Baylor and Oklahoma, but I think the same can be said against Iowa State and Oklahoma State as well. So, and I think Mark that the area, and there's been a couple of comments around this, so which made me kind of, I think the thought process here is, and I think this is where people kind of get rubbed the wrong way with Lincoln Riley, is that um, he comes off as a little soft. I think just in terms of what he says to the media, how he relates to his players and things like that. I think the softness, and just me personally, again, like I'm not absolutely not calling for anyone to get fired or anything like that, but I think for me, coming off of a loss, and his top two comments were upset with Aranda over kicking a late field goal, upset with the officials for not throwing a penalty for storming the field. It's a little weak to me. I don't think that's the flex that I probably would have had as a coach coming off of that game, like talking, hey, players didn't play good. We need to play better. We need to coach better. But you're talking about someone kicking a field goal late in the game, which, I mean, when you understand the reason why he did it, like in the moment, it doesn't make a ton of sense. But I mean, Lincoln did this a few years ago. Oklahoma. This is Jalen Hurts' year. Oklahoma beat Baylor, I think 66-33. Maybe a year before that. Um, Oklahoma's up 63-33. A minute and a half remaining, and Lincoln kicks a field goal. So, I mean, you only go back so far. So I think that's a lot of the issues with Lincoln. It's just kind of the softness that he's kind of, that what looks like he's embodied as the culture at Oklahoma.
Yeah, it is a bit strange that, okay, your team has underachieved all season. They're winning games, so let's give them credit, but underachieving based on the standard that everyone can see with the eye test. And finally, now you've lost a game, and you've lost by 2 scores, and you were clearly outplayed, and you're focused on and concerned with the other team kicking a field goal, which does not affect or impact in any way, or doesn't address the concerns on your team that has led to substandard play the entire season, and now finally a loss. Regardless of who storms the field or who kicks field goals at the end of the game, you're walking away from this stadium in this situation in a few minutes, and you're taking a team back to Oklahoma. Should be your focus.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, Mark, for me, if I'm a player and I listen to that, I'm trying to put myself in their shoes, what they're thinking, as far as that goes. I mean, I guess in one respect, I'm being protected to a certain degree, but at the same time, I think I would be like, we need to be better. Don't want a team kicking a field goal on us to make it a 14-point game. Like, I mean, if it's a 30-point game, yeah, maybe I can get behind it a little bit, but we got to be better. If we don't want that to happen, we need to be better. I mean, I think at the end of the day, and so I don't know. I mean, we started the season with the kind of the culture issue with some of those players taking their equipment off, thinking the game was over. Then they had to get retaped and getting back into the game. So I just think this culture thing that Oklahoma's got going on is just it's becoming bad, just for the program, just in general. And like I said, I mean, I said this in our post game that we did on Monday, but Oklahoma State right now is the team, which I don't think anybody would have ever said this, and I don't think it's maybe not ever been said, but Oklahoma State is the team that Oklahoma wanted to be or saw themselves being this year. Both got off to a slow start, which that happens. That's fine. But they caught their they got their stride now, and they are playing excellent on both sides of the ball. Playing just, I mean, they were just dominant against TCU against Saturday. Defensively, the best defense in the Big 12. Very physical, running the ball well. Quarterback is still maybe not completely trustworthy, but still he's playing good enough right now for them to win. So I think Oklahoma's looking at that and saying, at least maybe fans are looking at that like this is what we thought we would be. This is where we thought we would be headed in the last couple of games of the season. So at the first of the year we thought, or at least me thought, I mean, Oklahoma would be, when we were talking about does Oklahoma go undefeated or do they not? They'll be a favorite in every game. They're absolutely not going to be a favorite in Bedlam. If they're a 4-point pick at home against Iowa State, to be
Hopefully we still have Jason. I believe we do. There we go.
oh
I think
sorry
you're back.
sorry
You
about
just
that.
froze up there for about 10 seconds.
Oh, okay. So it's like I said, I don't know where you dropped, where I got dropped, but yeah, I mean, Oklahoma State is going to be a favorite going into that Bedlam game, the last game of the year, and this is incredibly important for Oklahoma to how they finish this season in terms of what this trajectory is. If they lose these last two games, they're not making the championship game, the Big 12 championship game. So they're right there with Clemson in terms of missing kind of that streak coming to an end. And not only do they not make the playoffs if they lose these last couple of games, they're not even in the New Year's Six bowl likely. So I think it's incredibly important for this program to be able to finish the right way. I don't know if they have the ability to at this point based on how the season has gone, but I think it's going to be very important for them to do everything they can to right the ship.
We talk Oklahoma football with all of you each and every Wednesday at 11:30 Central Time, and invite you to leave your comments and questions as we pour through them here. We got Jason Ray, as we always do, talking Sooners. You can catch Jason's work at Last Word on College Football, and Jason's also here post-game, typically after the ball game on Saturday with Oklahoma taking on Iowa State. I believe that's an 11 a.m. kickoff, correct?
That's right.
Yep. So this is the game that most anticipated to be the premier game in the conference during the offseason. That was the anticipation. Now we have Oklahoma State in particular showing themselves, which, we will, of course, address this next week with Bedlam straight ahead, but that'll be intriguing in terms of, as you just outlined, Oklahoma State's playing the best football in the conference. Oklahoma, of course, has the advantage of the rivalry, owning the series psychologically, all of that going into the game.
Yeah, no, you're right, Mark, and I think Iowa State's a weird team this year. Just defensively, I think is where they're struggling a little bit, at least in Big 12 play. They've not been as good. Gave up 41 points to Texas Tech last week, but offensively, they're about as good as they've been in the past. Brock Purdy is 15 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. Brees Hall and still having a great season, 1,200 yards rushing this season. So Oklahoma's going to have a big challenge. And even before this season, Mark, Iowa State has played Oklahoma tougher than really any other team in the conference, and I don't expect that to be any different. Iowa State is really back to a with the 4 losses, they're back to a spoiler role. I mean, I don't think that I don't know that there's a path that they could even make the I mean, possibly, but I don't think there's a big path for them to make the playoffs. I'm sorry, make the Big 12 championship, especially with the head-to-head loss to Baylor. So it's really Oklahoma State, and I think Baylor at this point in terms of in terms of the conference race. So yeah, I think it's a wake up call. I mean, obviously, I mean, I think you can tell kids from time and time again. But if they still keep winning, I think it's a different situation. But now you're coming off of a loss and know that you absolutely have to get this game. It'll like I said, it'll be a very I anticipate a very hard fought game. Tall receivers in terms of Charlie Kolar, really big from a tight end perspective, and Xavier Hutchinson in Oklahoma. Covered in the back. They did. Secondary play was better, I think, against Baylor. But the run defense wasn't as strong as they needed it to be. So I think you're looking at another close game that's going to come down to the wire. Even with Iowa State losing as many games as they have this year, their 4 losses, most of them have been close. I mean, Texas Tech was a 3-point loss. They lost by 7 to West Virginia. They lost by 2 to Baylor, and then they lost by 10 to Iowa. So all of those games are within 10 points. So I think it'll be another game that'll go into the fourth quarter, and probably the biggest key for Oklahoma, especially on the offensive side of the ball, is find a way to get some kind of a running game going. I think Texas Tech ran for around 200 yards against Iowa State, so there's opportunity there. They just have to be able to take advantage of that and play, honestly, their best game of the season to be able to win.
Some comments coming in through the live chat concerning the comparison of the LSU and Oklahoma programs. One particular viewer, Marshall, does not think that LSU can compare to Oklahoma as a job. It's a debatable topic. There's no doubt about that. Yes, Oklahoma has won more consistently than LSU. LSU did win a national championship just 2 years ago. They do have to fight through a more difficult conference. And then you have to just look at not just the history and the recent history and the winning percentage and championships, but as you mentioned, LSU just seems to be one of those few schools that will do anything within their power to win in football. Not that Oklahoma's not at that point either, but as you stated earlier, it does seem to be common thought that LSU would break the bank and pay whatever was required for a coach.
Oh, absolutely. I think whether it's Jimbo Fisher or whether it's Lincoln Riley, I think that they will attempt to make either one of those guys the highest paid coach in college football. I don't see Jimbo taking this job. I mean, honestly, I think I would say there's probably a less chance that Jimbo takes it than Lincoln takes it, to be honest with you. But I mean, I think those are probably the two big fish guys that they would go after. Dave Aranda is very interesting. I don't know if LSU feels like he's big enough yet for them. But I mean, seeing what he's been able to do with Baylor in just 2 years has been a pretty dramatic turnaround. I thought that when we were previewing the Big 12, I thought that they would be better. Obviously, not quite this good, but he's a proven commodity on the defensive side of the ball. I mean, that's very, very clear everywhere he's been, and then it's obviously been no different. Last year they were still pretty good defensively. They didn't get blown out, but having a full off season has seen him come to the forefront. So I think Aranda's going to be a factor at some point, maybe next year, in some job, whether it be an LSU, whether it be a USC, or whether it be somewhere, with some of the dominoes that fall with other coaching changes that could happen. So Yeah, no, they're just watching. I think where a lot of the love comes from, with kind of specifically from Oklahoma fans, because there's been a lot of positive conversation about Aranda from an Oklahoma perspective. I think where this comes from is, I think Oklahoma saw a very natural progression with Alex Grinch in the last couple of years. 2 years ago they were, in the 80s or 90s total defense wise, but they were much better than they were the previous year. Last year made just a tremendous jump into the top 20, top 30. And looking at it, I think most people expected Oklahoma to have probably a top 15, top 20 defense, and it's been anything but. It's been, kind of a massive disappointment on the defensive side of the ball based on what Oklahoma's expectations were coming into the season. So, I mean, I think that'll be interesting. There's a lot of talk that Alex Grinch may not be back one way or the other. Not that he'll get fired, but he'll just find somewhere else to go. But I think, that will be, does the and that's an interesting discussion here, that we've never really had. But his mentality from a defensive perspective on faster, quicker, leaner defensive linemen, and just across the board, is that something that works at the Power Five level? I mean, I know it. I know he was very successful with the scheme at Washington State, and granted, yes, Washington State's still at the Power Five level, but is it a scheme that can work for big time college football? Because you don't see that type of lineman at Georgia. You don't see that type of lineman at Ohio State. You don't see that type of lineman at Alabama. So, um, it was an experiment, and it's, I'm not completely saying that it didn't work, but I think it's something that in the off season that clearly will probably be evaluated in one way or the other.
You check out the Pac-12, and I'll try to refrain from being too harsh on the Pac-12 because I beat that conference up this year, but they've deserved it outside of one game pretty much. Um, yeah, and the Pac-12 is producing NFL players, so there's obviously a level of quality there, of course. But if you turn on a Washington State, Oregon State game and just look at the athletes on the field, it looks different than watching Ohio State and Penn State play, or Georgia and Tennessee play, or even a mid-level Big Ten or SEC game. It's just, they're just different dudes on the field.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that speaks to what you're talking about right there.
Yeah, I mean, and no, you're right, and I think this year's where the kind of the rubber met the road, just in terms of that. And like, can't argue with the success that he's had over the first couple of years. So you kind of, I mean, you kind of trust the process, to maybe not necessarily from a blind faith perspective, but you still trust that process. And now you are in a situation where your talent level has been much higher than it's been in the past, and you're still in a position where, across the board, Oklahoma has not been as good in any facet, defensively. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think that's something that, is up for evaluation after the end of the year, on, is this the right approach that we need to have going forward. And I think one of the, and again, this is room, don't know if this is true, but I think there's, from within the program, there's been some concern that Lincoln Riley's not allowing Grinch to practice really the way that he wants to practice. It kind of in the same mode of the softness he wants. Grinch wants very, very tough, hard, physical practices, and Riley has kind of shied away from that a little bit, just kind of protecting from injuries and things like that. So I don't know, how much of that's true, but it's something that I've kind of consistently heard here locally, over the course of the year. So again, I don't, behind closed doors, we don't know, what's happening, but it seems like there's there's a decent amount of really kind of questioning the the future and the what the trajectory of this program looks like right now.
It's good to see Cheryl here. Cheryl referenced the Oklahoma ranking prior to the loss against Baylor at number 8 in the college football playoff rankings. Had we had, Jason, the conversation before the season started that Oklahoma would have one loss after 10 games and be pushed down to number 13 in the playoff rankings, nobody would have believed it, because had you told most people Oklahoma's going to be 9-1 after 10 games, okay, well, we probably expected that they would be undefeated, but okay, they tripped up and they're still fine. And if they go through and win the Big 12, they're fine and they'll be in the playoff. But the lack of respect from the playoff committee was apparent from the first week of rankings at number 8, placing them behind a number of one-loss teams at the time: Michigan, Michigan State, Alabama, Ohio State, Oregon. My goodness, 5 teams with one loss that they were ranked behind, including a group of 5 in Cincinnati. And now with a loss, but still the Big 12 championship straight ahead within their control, they're down to number 13. And I don't know with that number 13 next to their name, if that's the way the committee perceives them at this point, with a win against Iowa State, Oklahoma State, and let's say a rematch against Oklahoma State. That's going to be an impressive run, but I don't know if that lifts them all the way up to the top 4.
No, I mean, I don't know. I don't think so, Mark. I mean, I'm with you. I mean, I think the respect or lack thereof that Oklahoma got in the initial, which was warranted from my perspective. I think, and then being at number 13 now, it's probably about right where they need to be based on the the track record that they have. I mean, you could make an argument that some of these teams below them are actually playing better football than Oklahoma is. Texas A&M, even though I know that they lost last week, BYU, Wisconsin's playing really well right now. But I mean, they still got the 3 losses. So yeah, I think it's a hard path for Oklahoma to go down. Even to your point, Mark, um, if they beat Oklahoma State twice, or I think probably what looks better for them is they're able to avenge their loss to Baylor in the Big 12 championship game. If that kind of comes to fruition, um, but yeah, no, I think that the path is much more difficult, and exactly to your point, we've never seen this from an Oklahoma team in terms of the where they are with one loss. They've in the past they've not went a full season, being completely undefeated since I believe 2004 was the last time that they finished the regular season undefeated, and obviously that's not going to be the case this year, but still they've been they've had one loss, and then they still have found a way to make them to get themselves back up in the playoff conversation. And I mean, and I guess there's probably a path where they could get there, but I think they need a lot of things to go their way over the next 3 weeks. I mean, they need a Georgia. Georgia needs to go undefeated and kind of remove Alabama or a second SEC team from that consideration. They probably need an Oregon loss to not have the Pac-12 to have a representative there. They probably would require an Ohio State to kind of run the table, and so that there's no other Big Ten team like in the mix there. And the Big Ten's probably likely only to get one anyways. This year it's going to be one of them, but it just kind of depends on who it is, probably. And then I don't know. I don't know what they think. I don't know what the committee would think of a one-loss Big 12 champion, if it's Oklahoma, over Cincinnati. Let's say. I mean, Cincinnati's a big winner in this, right? With they're still hoping and continuing to to covet chaos to happen in the in these conferences. So a lot of football to be played left. There's still an outside chance, but the path is much tougher than it's ever been, I think, for Oklahoma.
So the reality right now is that Oklahoma is not playing good enough football to win the Big 12 or get to the playoff. But we know that the talent's there, the track record's certainly there, and the teams that they're playing are good, but they're not daunting, dominant teams. So are they as good as those teams or better? Yeah. They're right in that range. We don't know how it's going to unfold, but for argument's sake, if they flip a switch, and none of us would expect them to march out there and start beating Iowa State and Oklahoma State 49-0, but they win fairly impressively. They're 10-point wins, and they knock off an Iowa State team that's going to finish the season then I guess 7-5, and then they beat an Oklahoma State team that's going to be 10-2 after Oklahoma defeats them. And then they get Baylor in that rematch that in a sense cancels the loss that they suffered on the road earlier, and they beat a Baylor team that was 11-1.
Yeah,
I don't know how they can't suddenly have to reset their thought process on Oklahoma football if they get through Iowa State, Oklahoma State, and Baylor and are sitting there as the Big 12 champion with one loss. It's certainly going to be a much better resume than Oregon's, even with the Ohio State win.
Oh no, you're absolutely right. No, and I think that will be part of the conversation if Oklahoma is able to do that. I mean, the thoughts of the chances of Baylor making it to the Big 12 championship game is not strong right now. With if Oklahoma runs the table, I think their best path right now is for Oklahoma to lose a couple of games these to make it to the Big 12 championship game, because Baylor's coming in with those two conference losses already. So they would need one of two things. I think they would need Oklahoma to lose these next two games, or they would need to win out, obviously, and have Oklahoma State lose at Texas Tech on Saturday, and then obviously lose to Oklahoma on Thanksgiving weekend. So, but who knows? And they got a tough game themselves at Kansas State, who's playing pretty well right now in the Big 12. So, yeah, there's a lot of craziness that's still going to happen. I'm sure you've got opportunities for based on tough road games. You've got opportunities for maybe 4, possibly 5 teams ahead of Oklahoma to lose. To lose Saturday. You've got Oregon going to Utah. You've got Michigan State obviously playing Ohio State. You've got Oklahoma State going to Texas Tech. You've got Wake Forest going to Clemson. You've got Baylor going to Kansas State. So there's opportunities there if things go right, that Oklahoma could put themselves in position with a win. And to your point on the quality of wins that they'll have, which will be I know Iowa State's not a top 25 team, but I think that still probably brings a little bit of respect to
It
it.
should.
And then certainly Oklahoma State either twice, or Oklahoma State and or Baylor.
Yeah, I can't criticize, at least in this way, the committee at this point, because I'm kind of taking the same tact with my rankings, and now I'm starting to rethink it. But basically, if you believe in the head-to-head, trumping everything, and of course, along with the head-to-head, there has to be a record that is the same, if not better, than the other team. So it's not like Oregon can be 6-4 and you take them over a 9-1 Ohio State. It's because Oregon's been able to, much like Oklahoma, navigate a schedule and get through with only one loss. But if you honor the head-to-head, then you place Oregon in front of Ohio State, and then that creates some kind of a lineup after that, because then you have to put you. Let's see if I could be a little bit more clear about this. Either you're going to value that Oregon win at a high rate and just put them in that 2 or 3 spot. The committee's got them at 3, and then you've got this lineup behind Oregon because Ohio State's gaining much respect too. But if you're going to keep them behind Oregon, then you got this lineup behind Ohio State. Or you basically say Oregon's resume is not that strong. We're still going to honor the head-to-head with Ohio State, but Michigan, Michigan State, Cincinnati, we're going to put all them with a better resume. I don't know about Cincinnati, but with a better resume, they don't have a loss in front of Oregon, and then that would put Ohio State at the back of the line because they've got the head-to-head loss. It's just, I think it's the first time that I've had to deal with this situation of a team that goes out there and gets maybe the best win in the country early in the season, and they don't back it up on the field in terms of performance, but they also don't implode and lose 3 games. They stay on the high wire and they're able to navigate it. And so I think people are having an issue of what to do with Oregon.
Yeah, it's to your point, Mark, it's very, very bizarre. We talked about Oklahoma resembling the Florida State team of a few years ago. Maybe Oregon's a better example of them. Exactly, have a great win against Ohio State, but has really been unimpressive every single game. I mean, last week was no different, 38-24 over Washington State. It's okay. I mean, it's not anything to they were never in danger of losing the game, but again, they were never. It was not a dominant performance. But I think the only thing that I would, disagree with the committee on, either head to head trumps everything or it doesn't. They've sent two mixed messages with ranking Oregon above Ohio State and then ranking Michigan above Michigan State. So I mean, I think those are the 2 things that they struggle defending, I think, and just kind of listening to the commentary. I mean, I think they're I don't know why they put themselves in that position, which to rank Michigan above Michigan State. I mean, they kind of had to do it this week since they did it the first week, but still, it's just a little bizarre to me to send both of those messages. But yeah, I mean, I think this Saturday will be the toughest game that Oregon has played, and I think they're an underdog at Utah. I think Utah's like a 2 or 3 point pick that last time I saw. So there's just some great games here down the stretch these last couple of weeks that will kind of solidify these rankings and and where people will be at. But no, I'm with you. I think it's bizarre. It's bizarre in terms of what that what those 2 mixed messages between those 4 teams look like.
And it truly is, especially when you take it to this level. Ohio State, Oregon play, Oregon wins, fine, but then they go play these separate schedules, and Ohio State's clearly playing better competition, and that will continue to increase the next 3 weeks.
Yeah.
By far. So Ohio State's almost playing a different level. They are playing a different level of football compared to Oregon. So they're keeping Oregon ahead of Ohio State. They're not keeping Michigan State, or never did place them ahead of Michigan, even though their schedules are comparable and their results and performance against these comparable teams and much the same teams. You would think, okay, Michigan and Michigan State's resumes and performance on the field versus the same teams or like teams is very similar. So we're going to really honor the head-to-head because they both beat Nebraska by a field goal. Michigan was more impressive against Indiana than Michigan State, but Michigan State annihilated Rutgers and Michigan did not. You could go through again, because they're playing in the same conference and in the same division, they have all these comparable results that you can compare. And you really can't make a decided outside of the head-to-head. You can't make it. It's difficult to make a decision between Michigan, Michigan State is my point. So why not honor the head-to-head versus Ohio State and Oregon, you're honoring the head-to-head, and Ohio State's gone and played a much more difficult schedule in dominant fashion versus Oregon. It doesn't make any sense.
No, it doesn't. I'm with you. I think they have it backwards. I mean, I would see ranking Ohio State above Oregon, and then exactly to your point, making the head-to-head really matter when they have like schedules. But I mean, I can't imagine a situation if Oregon, and maybe it won't matter because it's 3 versus 4, but I mean it matters in terms of who you play. You don't want to have to play Georgia in your first game of the playoffs, but I can't imagine a scenario where if Oregon wins out and Ohio State wins out, that Ohio State's not at least the 3 seed and they're flip flopped here, just because of exactly what you said. Ohio State has two certainly at this point they have 2 top 10 wins if they were able to win the games ahead of them with Michigan State and then Michigan next week. I think Michigan goes to Maryland, I think, on Saturday. So,
Yep.
I mean, not it's not a walkover, but not a tough game. But they win those 2 games, and then likely, I mean, Wisconsin has Nebraska Saturday, then they go to Minnesota, the last game of the year. So, if they win those games, likely a number, what Wisconsin, like 15 now, I think, likely a top 12 Wisconsin team, whereas Oregon has Utah, which is a top 25 team now. But if they beat them, they probably won't be top 25, or Arizona State won't be top 25 when they play them in the Pac-12 championship game. So I think I think logic will have to win out at some point, even though it's kind of staring them in the face currently. I think after a while that logic will certainly have to win out between those 2 teams.
Oklahoma Sooners Live here each and every Wednesday, folks, at 11:30 Central Time. Please join us and bring some folks with you that love Oklahoma football, or just as you can see in the live chat, college football fans in general. Check out Jason's work at Last Word on College Football, and join me in just a couple minutes as soon as I can turn this around for Ohio State Buckeyes Live on our Ohio State channel right now. Jason, we appreciate it. We'll see you after the game, correct? Are you going to be able to make post-game?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, we'll do post-game immediately following, like 2:33-ish local time on Saturday.
Nice. All right. Thank you so much as always, Jason. Have a good week and enjoy the game on Saturday.
All right. Thanks, Mark. I appreciate it.